Okay, so we all know about scoping, correct? Yes, awesome. So this morning, our subject is scoping the project. With us here is Kelly Martin, and she is the Region 1 Construction Project Manager. And then also Bill Nash, and he is from Region 4. He also is Construction Project Manager and also one of your fellow boot campers. So please give them your attention.
So we are super excited to talk about scoping. So how many here have not been involved in scoping yet? All right, so we have a few, good. I'm glad we have a few. So scoping, I think, is one of those things that David had mentioned and alluded to that we've had some issues with. I've been in ODOT for a year. I've gone through one scoping cycle, but I have inherited projects that had some issues that definitely were a result of from scoping. So that's what we're hoping to talk about today, to review with you and hopefully to share some things that we can all learn from. So who am I? I'm Bill Nash. I am, construction project manager, but TPM, transportation project manager. I've been with ODOT for just over a year and a month. I was a project manager in the private sector for 20 years and did everything on the upfront side pretty much just like I do now, just like the TPMs do. So currently I'm delivering projects combined total of about 20 million and I've gone through the one STIP scoping cycle.
And hi, my name is Kelly Martin. And I have been with ODOT for over 20 years, with the state for about 24 years. I am what used to be a senior project leader up in the Region 1 Portland office. And I've led scoping through two processes. I was around for a third process. Every time it has been very different. It keeps changing. It would be nice to get a formal process that works. But partially we're trying to get to where we see what really works. I have delivered projects that were the result of not being scoped or not well scoped. And so that's a lot of the experience we're going to be talking about today is why it's really important to well scope a project. I also want to clarify for some of you out there, I keep getting introduced to people and they're saying, hi, it's really nice to finally meet you. I've recently changed my name to Kelly Martin, used to be Kelly Hawley. There is another Kelly who recently changed her name to Kelly Martin about a month ahead of me. And people keep calling me and asking me things, and if I sound really confused, it's because I'm not that Kelly Martin. Because apparently she's really actively involved in things as well. And so I don't know how many phone calls she's gotten for me, but I have gotten multiple phone calls for her in the last month. So just so you know, if you try to call me and the person sounds really confused, that's why.
So what is scoping? Scoping is the process of validating a project's purpose and potential investment strategies while identifying risks and opportunities in the delivery of the project. So some of the expected outcomes that we're looking for should include a well-defined scope, schedule, budget, opportunities, risk register, delivery approach, final business case, and a draft charter. So I think over the past few days, we've already learned about some of these things that we need to be looking for. Yesterday, I thought we had a great presentation on risks. When do we start looking at those risks? We really need to start looking at scoping. Don't wait until we get into our PE and then learn, oh, we've got these issues. We should have had those figured out earlier on. We need to be learning in the scoping process.
Or at least throw money into the project to deal with that risk, because you may not be able to actually figure it out during scoping.
At the very end, like we've got the draft charter, we should not be waiting again until PE to begin drafting our charter. The scoping, as a result, we should know what our, sorry, I had a brain lapse. We should know what our overall project scope is going to be. We should have it very well defined. And then we document that clearly within the draft charter. So when we start scoping, we are given a business case. That business case is merely the why. We need to then take that and move on to how. And that's really what scoping is about. So why is scoping so important? So scoping is like climbing Mount Shasta. So I'm a hiker, avid hiker. I love to climb mountains also. And I've climbed Mount Shasta a number of times. And so this year, we did not make it. The previous year, I made it with my son, my oldest boy. And so why did we make it last year and not this year? And if any of you have climbed Mount Shasta, just to give you a perspective, it's 14,200 feet. The tallest mountain in the continental US is 14,500. So it gives you a little perspective. There are aspects of Mount Shasta that you can reach out when you're standing and you can be touching the mountain in front of you. So it's that steep and that technical. It's not something you can just decide, hey, I'm going to go climb Mount Shasta this weekend. It takes prep, it takes proper tools, proper equipment, and it takes time. It's something that you need to prepare for. So this year, the temperatures were brutally cold. And as we were climbing, our drinks inside our packs were freezing. They were freezing almost to the point of being solid. It was that cold. We had gusts up to 50-mile-an-hour winds. So safety became a big factor as we were climbing. We had the proper equipment. We had our ice axe, our crampons, had our coats. We stayed warm enough, although one of our group, he had to turn back because he wasn't warm enough. So as we continued to climb and we were getting up towards one of the major milestones on the mountain, that's really when the gusts of wind started picking up, and we were actually having to lean into the mountain because the wind was pushing so hard. So how does this story relate to scoping, you might ask? So I would say that the state, ODOT, is making a solid attempt to give us the tools that we need to be able to scope. So whereas we need ice axe and crampons to climb Mount Shasta, in order to scope well, we need the tools, we need the training, we need the proper forms, we need uniformity, and all of that we are trying to do right now as ODOT. We're trying to make it a much more uniform. In the past, in speaking with Kelly, Region 1 does it much different than Region 4. But as we have collaborated, we have seen that we also have some similarities, some things that we do the same. And that will always be the case, that because she is in a much more urban area and I'm in a much more rural area, we're going to have differences. And we understand that and we recognize that. So what else can we learn from my Mount Shasta climbing? We need to better understand the risks. The main reason why I wasn't able to climb this year and make it was because of the risks that were involved. The wind was supposed to stay until 1 o'clock, I learned later. Had I gone in the afternoon, I could have done it. But I didn't understand and realize those risks up front that I should have prepped for, and I didn't. As we better understand our risks up front, we'll be better prepared to be able to fulfill the project delivery. So poorly scoped projects. I just wanted to give a quick example of one that I was handed. So this project was part of an IAMP, and it was fully funded all the way through CN in this STIP cycle. And as the project came to me, and I began looking at it, began project initiation, looked at it with the team, went back to the program manager and said, what is the purpose of this project? Why are we doing this part of the IAMP now? We actually had another project right next to it within that IAMP that was also funded. The two together didn't make sense. In order for one of those to happen, we had to do a different phase of the IAMP rather than the one that was actually funded. And so we had to make that determination and go back to the program manager and say, we think we need to make a change here. And so we did, and he agreed. We, as a project team, made that adjustment. Unfortunately, we had to go and do a STIP amendment. It was a big change that we had to make. But had the scoping gone well and they spent the necessary time up front, we could have avoided all of that extra time, and we could have moved forward the right way to begin with.
So in talking about well-scoped or not so well-scoped projects, I also have an example for you. But I want to explain that it's not always about you didn't foresee things in scoping, or it wasn't that you didn't try to scope it well. I am currently working on a project that it started as we're adding a CD road on 217. It was going to be a small little project. Then House Bill 2017 came along and they said, oh, we're going to add funding and you can do this as well. And that little project, and I don't even know what the budget started at, probably around $5 million, $6 million project. It's now a $130 million project. So you can imagine all that scope that got dumped into this project that was not in the original. Oh, we're going to add a little CD road. We're now adding aux lanes that span about 5 miles on both the north and southbound directions. We've got about $10 million worth of bike ped work that has been included in this project. We didn't really have a well-scoped project handed over when all of this was added to the project, because the legislature said, here's the money, go and finish this, it's been in preliminary, they've been looking at it, but we haven't made it all the way through the process to get it well scoped. So you may still see projects, even as we improve our scoping throughout the state, you're still occasionally gonna get projects that maybe won't be completely well scoped. So you'll still have examples of why it's so important to scope as well as you can. So the next few slides we're going to kind of go through very quickly. There was a section from how does a project get determined that it's going to be scoped? How is the initial business case written? I'm going to tell you, I don't know a lot about that process. We do have slides that have notes that talk about that, and we wanted to leave them in here so that when you go back and look at these slides later, you have information that neither Bill or I are involved in that process, so we didn't feel real comfortable truly talking about it, but we do want to provide the information. So this shows us where we're at in the racetrack, and the planning and transition portion, that's what we don't really have a lot of experience in.
We did get some training, though, already this week. I think it was Eric, if I remember right, I think day one. And he gave us some great insight as to how that upfront process begins. So I think we've kind of already received some info on that.
I don't have much to say on this one.
This one, again, is kind of the same thing, kind of goes through the upfront overall, the STIP program development, which we typically don't get a whole lot involved in, but it is good to understand and to know the process behind it. So I would really encourage you, take the time, go look at the slides afterwards. They will be up on the project delivery portal site. So scoping overview. So there are 4 main areas to be aware of within scoping. And so we have forms, templates, we have roles, responsibilities, and we have process, and we have storage. So the forms will cover some of the key forms, but not all in scoping. We'll talk about this a little bit as we go through. There are more forms that can be used in scoping. Again, yesterday we saw one of those within the risks they presented to us. We just used that one, the scoping risk form, for the first time this last scoping cycle within Region 4. Not sure if other regions use that or not. We'll briefly touch roles and responsibilities, the process, what we do, how we do scoping, and then the storage of that also, and how that has recently transitioned to now it is within ProjectWise like all of our other projects.
So the first form that we're going to talk about is the business case. The business case is really important to us because it is the funding manager's way of saying, hey, this is the project I want you to scope. This is these are the things that I need fixed. And so it's where we start. When we start the scoping process, I'm handed a bunch of business cases. I review them and pull out, these are the key things that we need to talk about as a scoping team. And we are going to talk about the teams and how important they are. And just know the basic information to present to the team. And that all comes from the business case. And this is a really important tool that is filled out not by the project managers, but by the funding managers.
And just remember, keep in mind, this is the why. This is the whole reason why we're doing the project to begin with. So that understanding this, I believe, is key to moving forward and being able to properly scope.
So this slide, again, it gets into processes that I work internal, and I actually am doing some consultant project. I'm doing a hybrid of a consultant and internal project right now. I have not done a lot of, I haven't done anything that is a local agency project. This slide talks about the local agency process. I have scoped some of the local agency process. It is very important that you involve the local agencies when you do that.
All right, digital signatures. So this is one that I have a funny experience with, because when I first came to ODOT, nobody told me anything about digital signatures. I was told, yes, you have to put digital signatures on things. And so I thought, okay, I've done that before with other forms in the past. And so I created one, sent it off. Nope, that's the wrong kind of digital signature. Wasn't told anything else. Okay, so I go back, send another one. Nope, that's the wrong kind of digital signature. So one thing I think we can all do better at, if you do find somebody new that's coming in, take them under your wing, tell them about DocuSign, please. It can save a lot of time and a headache. So ODOT uses digital signatures specifically with DocuSign. And it's, once you understand that, once you get access to it, you have to get access through these people, ODOT digital signature at odotstate.or.us. Please email them if you do not have rights, because you will not get them if you do not email them. That is an important thing. I also have quite a few other emails that just kind of help explain the process, how you can use DocuSign, If you need more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be happy to share those emails with you and help in any way I can on DocuSign. But again, just keep in mind that as you go through this process, you do need to use DocuSign digital signatures for your paperwork.
Okay, this next slide, I am actually very thankful that we do this now. We store all of our scoping notes in ProjectWise. Who sets up the folders, how that happens, it's going to be different per region. In Region 1, we do have a STIP coordinator. That person is responsible for getting all of the folders set up, getting all of the initial information put into those folders, and then disseminating them to the project manager that's going to be running that part of scoping. The reason why I'm thankful for this is when I first started it in Region 1 as a project manager, I was told, oh, well, go and talk to this person who did all the scoping on that, and they know all the information. And so I'd go over and talk to John, and John was a great wealth of knowledge. I could go and ask him anything, and he remembered everything. Unfortunately, John left us, so now who do I go talk to? Because John took all that information with him. It's all in his head. He did have it stored someplace on his server, in his computer. I don't know where that is, and nobody else does either. So when he left, we didn't really have access to all the information that John used to provide when we'd just go over and talk to him. So having it all placed in ProjectWise, in the folder so that you can find it. Do keep a list, because this is not going to be your key number yet. So keep a list somehow so that you know how to find the right folder. But that is why it's important to have one person in your region who is really involved, but also documents it so that we know how to find it if that person decides to leave.
So I know that we are also getting better at linking these STIP scoping files to the actual files when they become a STIP project. And so that is also helpful. We're able to move all of that information we had, pull it into our actual STIP folders when it does become a STIP project, which again is very helpful.
So when you are scoping, there is a file structure set up. You have the temp folder as kind of your sandbox. That's where you can go and work and drop things in that you're going to come back and work on. The scoping documents, PDF deliverables go into the scoping documents folder. Photos, if you have to go out on site and take pictures, have those someplace where people can actually reference back to them. So put them in where the photos are. And then any supporting documents, so the draft business case, and go in the supporting documents folder. Those folders are all going to go into the key number folder when it gets set up in ProjectWise, and you will want to reference back to that when you're kicking off the project, because I know that I've been handed projects where it's like, okay, here's the scoping notes, and you look at it and it's like, I have 30 pages of scoping notes, 1 page from each discipline, sometimes 2 or 3 pages from each discipline, and they talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but there's not a summary. And I really appreciate a summary where I can go and read 1 or 2 pages, and then I have the backup documentation if I need to get into the details, but I want what I need up front.
So roles and responsibilities. So we start with the funding program manager. They are really, again, creating the why, giving us the business case. They are responsible for managing the funding program portfolio, which is the primary source for the project, and they provide the initial business case. Next, we have the project sponsor. They are kind of the liaison between the program managers and the regions. They identify and complete leveraging opportunities portions of the business case. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I would still highly encourage you, if you don't see any leveraging opportunities on the business case, look for them. Ask your project team, talk to them. Project sponsor also, they can be the area manager, could be district manager, could be project delivery manager, region maintenance, or operations manager. Maintenance manager, they support to some of the funding managers in developing the initial needs of the business case. They are the overall owners of the final product after construction, and because they will own it, you can understand why they are going to want to participate, why they should be involved, and why they should sign everything as they go through. So gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is responsible for overseeing the process of the business case completion from receipt of the initial needs business case through the signatures on the final business case. So overall, in our area, that was the area manager that kind of took responsibility of that and just helped to oversee the scoping as a whole. They are responsible for the pre and the post scoping program meetings in the region. So this could, again, be one of those things that varies region by region. Scoping coordinator, they facilitate and coordinate the different funding programs within the development of the business cases, and they work with the funding program managers to collect and to save the business cases within ProjectWise. Again, this can vary region by region. I know for Region 4, our area manager and our senior project manager kind of work together on that. They help set up the folders within ProjectWise, that kind of thing. So, and I think this again goes back to what Kelly had mentioned of we had an overall Excel spreadsheet, listed all of the projects out that we were scoping with their scoping number, and then it linked the name, and then that could be our reference for future that we could go back to and determine once we have our key number, this was our scoping number, and we can link them that way.
Now we're going to get into how do you scope. And I think that this is one of the most important things when it comes to scoping. You need to build a team. I know that this last round of scoping, the project managers were in charge of leading the team and making sure that all the scoping notes get compiled and the scoping was done completely. But I can't do that alone. You can't do that alone because we are, well, project managers, we lead the cats. We know how to herd them. We know how to help make them do the things we need them to do. But honestly, our cats are really, really smart, and they're the ones that we need, because I can't do it without them. And depending on your project and sometimes where you're at, but actually most of these disciplines, some of these disciplines may be doubled up by one person handles them in different regions. We have in Region 1, all of these are different people. And so from environmental, I may only have one environmental person sitting at the table, but they will go back and talk to the 8 other people in their section to have the scoping notes come in for how birds impact your project, how fish impact your project. A lot of times you're not, especially when you're starting, you don't realize how much a bird can impact your project and how it can make it so that you can't even go out to your project site and see the project site except for in the window when the bird is not nesting. And I've had projects like that where it's like, I really need to get out to this site. We were cutting trees off of a cliff in a national forest. And then the Forest Service said, no, you can't go out there until the birds are gone. We'll tell you when you can get out there. Well, we started the project about the time that the bird nesting season started. And we went through about 8 months before we were able to actually get out there and look at the trees that we needed to cut down. So it's important to know these things so that you can schedule the project. That particular project, it was driven by a fire, so we didn't have this opportunity, but it can help direct when you're going to kick off the project. So it's important to bring all of these people in, especially maintenance and construction. Construction is who has to build what you are designing, and maintenance has to maintain what you're designing. And so you need to make sure that it is maintainable and that you're designing something that they can actually handle. So it's really important to have them on your team.
This again was another thing that I kind of learned. I was told basically put a skeleton team together and do your scope. As I went through, I learned, oh, I need to add this person. Oh, I need to add this person. And so my suggestion would not be start with a skeletons team. I would say invite everybody. Invite everybody you can. And then let them make the determination, oh, I'm really not needed on this. Then okay, they can be off the team. But as long as they've had that opportunity, how many people said as we've gone through this week so far, how many people said, engage me early? We've heard that from almost every discipline, I think. Engage me early, okay? Scoping is your opportunity to engage them early. Get them in there, get them involved. Give them the opportunity to say whether they should be on the team or whether they should not be. And then if there's something comes up later, it's back on them and say, you had your opportunity, we gave you that. You had the chance to look at the project and really get into it.
One more thing on that, engage your old heads. Bring the people in who have been here forever, who say, oh, I remember when we did this project 15 years ago. Because they're gonna remember things that you have no idea. It's stuff that's not in the database. It's stuff that the program managers don't necessarily know. Engage those who've been there before.
All right, so I have my team. Now what do I do? How many of you know that you actually have an EA for scoping? Sweet. Okay. So you don't need to just put it onto your IN or put it onto one of your other projects.
I'm going to put it on Oscar's IN.
So you actually get a scoping EA number. So first, get your EA, right? First and foremost. Okay, you've got your team, and get your project-wise folders. Make sure that they are set up so that as you begin gathering information, you have a place to store it, to put it. Starting off, before you really even meet as a team, I would strongly recommend understanding the business case that you get. Put your summary together. What is it you're going to try to do as a project team? How are you going to determine your scope? How are you going to determine the possible delivery of the project? So you'll get a scoping worksheet. Make sure that you start on that. Initial meeting with the team. Ask questions. Talk to them and help them to understand the why and then how you can meet the needs of that why. How are you going to go about solving the why? What kind of delivery means are you looking at? And please, again, ask questions. That's the best way to get involvement from the team. Other things, look for leveraging options. Make sure that you speak to your team. Are there active transportation options that we have here? Are there any other types of leveraging options? Can we combine this with another project? I have one project that we were working through scoping that we ended up having a bridge deck that we were going to replace. That was a totally separate scoped project. I have a signal that was a totally separate scoped project. I've got a preservation that runs right through all of that corridor. Okay, well, let's lump them all together. It doesn't make sense to have 3 different projects running, right? Let's put them together so that we can work together as a whole. So Abe Lincoln gave a quote. I love this quote. He said that, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Okay, we as a whole, I believe, in ODOT, just because of, I know I haven't been here long, but because of the projects that I was handed, we have not put enough time into sharpening the axe. We need to put more time into the scoping, more effort, more collaboration, so that we can have a better understanding, clearer defined scope when we get to the actual delivery time. Desk scoping. Most of our stuff, I believe, we can probably desk scope. There may be opportunities or reasons why we need to get out into the field. If so, take the effort, the time to do it. It's better to fully understand, again, the project going into it.
I'll go from there. So when we did scoping last time, we were given a week. Said, here's your team, go. I set it up that the first day I introduced the project, said here, this is, I took the business cases, had reviewed them previously, and went forward and said, okay, this is what I pulled out of the business cases, got additional information from the team. What else do you know about this? Because a bridge project, your bridge guys are gonna know more about the project than you do. Let them talk, share the additional stuff that you need to know. Then I gave the team a day, the rest of that day and the next day to do the desk scoping and determine which projects we actually needed to go out on site to see. There are projects that you do have to go see. There are projects that you can easily scope from your desk. You have to determine what they are. Then we had another meeting and we discussed what we determined from the desk scoping, shared the additional information. That's where you start talking and brainstorming and coming up with things that you need to be determining in your scoping. Like, what risks are you identifying? What problems do you see? What history was somebody able to dig up on the project? And then you go out and do the field visits. And you go and actually look at the area, because you'll have areas that when you're driving it in Google, that helps a lot compared to 10, 15 years ago when we didn't have Google Maps to look at. But there's still things you can't see just from the drive-by. And there's things that you have to get off of the highway and go stand on the side and look under the bridge and see what you're going to, like the fact that my piling it's only 20 feet from the railroad tracks, which means any work we're doing here, we're gonna have to engage the railroad, and that is a major risk, especially out in the gorge, and we're dealing with UP. You just added probably a year of time to your project, and had we not gone and looked and seen how close we were to the railroad, we may have missed that, because when you drive by it on Google, you don't see the railroad because it's underneath, it's down below, you don't see it. So sometimes it is really important to get out there and actually physically see what you're scoping. And then we come back together on Friday and we have a sit down where I fill out a lot of paperwork I have to fill out, and I make the team help me. I say, all right guys, where did we land on the scope? What is the final? Let's summarize. This is the summary that I talked about earlier that I want every time I'm handed a chunk of scoping notes. My scoping notes are usually about this thick. I want to be able to read 1 or 2 pages. So let's put together a summary that says, this is where we landed, because we scoped 4 or 5 different options. This is the one we landed on, and this is why we landed on this one. And so I outline, this is the final scope, this is why. These are the things that we decided not to do, and this is why. Get that summary, but have the team help you write that summary, because you can't know everything. That's why you have a team. Have them help you write that. You also can fill out the risk register, and you can fill out the form I'm going to be talking about here shortly, the work zone decision tree. Have your team help you fill those things out that last day.
I think another important thing, identify any IGAs that may be necessary. Again, before you are even able to get your EA, right? You got to have any IGAs set up, so make sure that you can identify those up front if possible.
Okay, so the expected outcome from your scoping. You are expected to have a well-defined list. Write that summary page. You will appreciate it 3 years from now when you are handed that list of scoping notes and you don't remember everything you guys talked about in that meeting. Some of you might have really great memories and be able to remember these things. I cannot. If I scoped it 3 years ago, little pieces will come back, but I need those notes to help me remember what we talked about. A list of agreed upon items to include and what not to include, a list of assumptions and constraints. You need to write what your assumptions were. If you assumed that you will not impact the railroad, And you put that in there, that this schedule we wrote is based on the fact that we're not going to impact the railroad, because as soon as you triggered the railroad, you just triggered probably another year in your schedule. If you didn't realize that you were going to, we're not going to have to purchase right-of-way. So we can have an accelerated schedule. All of a sudden, oh, I need this right-of-way. Right-of-way needs at least a year after DAP, after you've identified it. So you just extended your schedule. It's important that you put those assumptions in so that you know where you started. And that way, when you go and say, I need to extend this schedule a year, you can also say why. Because in the scoping, they said that I wasn't going to have to purchase right-of-way. But I have 5 right-of-way files that I need to get for ADA purposes. We need to get these temporary easements because we have to do ADA improvements that were not in the initial scope. That just kicked out your schedule. It also kicked out your budget. But you have the justification, because anytime you have to go to the OTC and say, I need more money, I need more time, I need anything, they're going to say why. So that helps you with the why. You have to also say what type of design you're assuming. Are you assuming you're going to do a 3D design? Are you limiting your Class 2 prep, or are you expecting a lot of Class 3 prep on your projects? And then have the final business case and a draft charter for follow-up. Like I said, talked about the decision tree a little bit already. This document is a traffic document. However, the project managers, at least I can speak for Region 1, the project managers are responsible to make sure that this gets filled out, and that it gets filled out at every milestone. And the way I do this is I set up a meeting after the PDT and say those who need to be involved in this need to stay. And you bring in the people who can actually give good input. So traffic will be there. You also want your public involvement people there. You want your construction people there. People who can talk about how to fill out the work zone decision tree and have the insights for things. I don't work in construction. I don't know how, when they do a detour for pedestrians, I don't know how that's going to necessarily impact them building the project. Your construction guys can help you with that. Bring in the people who know. Your job is to coordinate those people and to help them fill out the form and make sure that it gets filled out regularly. It is not your job to go and fill out this form for them, because you don't have that knowledge. You have to bring in your experts who do.
Benefit cost analysis. So some of you will have to do this, some of you will not. I don't have any projects where I have to do this with. Kelly, on the other hand, she has a much larger project. She might have to, but again, in her instance, she doesn't either. So there are certain requirements that must be met in order for you to do this benefit cost analysis. If you meet that, it is not optional. It is something that must be done. So any highway modernization transportation project or capacity building transportation project estimated cost at least $15 million needs the benefit cost analysis. If it is not an earmarked project from the House Bill 2017, then you do not need to do it. I mean, if it is, you do not need to do it. If it does not have a CN within the STIP funding cycle or program, you do not need to do it. If it is not focused on capacity or modernization, you do not need to do it. And if the total cost does not exceed $15 million, you don't need to do it. However, one caveat to that is if you end up getting an amendment that increases the cost to over $15 million, then you have to do it. So again, if it meets all of that criteria, it's something that you must do. If you're close to that and you're curious if you need to, you can if you want. It's not a necessity. In some cases, you may find that it is worthwhile to do that. And this is effective as of January 4th of 2019. So for new projects, the project's business case gatekeeper will be responsible for identifying when the BCA is or may be required and notifying the program implementation and analysis unit. Also, as the project goes forward, I'm sure your STIP coordinator will work with you also and give you a little reminder, hey, we're bumping up over the 15 million mark.
So next we're going to talk about schedule, and we are running short on time, so we probably need to try to go quickly through these next few slides. When I first started, I was handed 4 projects, didn't have a whole lot of guidance on what to expect as we went through the process. I set up my schedules thinking, oh, well, let's just keep them kind of all on the same schedule. Big mistake, don't ever do that. I ended up with 4 PS&Es in 2 months. That was not a fun experience. So realize that when you're setting the schedules, you need to be looking at the time it's going to take to design the project, but also the timing. You don't want to end up sending all of the projects to your construction office at the same time, where all of a sudden they went from having nothing to do to, hey, we just PS&E'd 8 projects and you guys all need to go now, because they're not going to like you very much either. So it is important when you're looking at schedules, make sure that you're allowing enough time. Like I said, railroad is going to add a year to your project. Right away, you need a year after DAP. If you're working with the U.S. Forest Service, there's a good chance you're going to need some extra time for negotiations with them. Mobility, you need to consider how your project and impacts on the freight getting around is going to be impacted by other projects in the same area or on parallel routes that are going to impact your ability to do both projects at the same time. It's important to look at all of those things. Those are risks that will be identified as you are going through the scoping process. So you are looking at not just how long is it going to take to design the project, but also the timing of when you want to start the design, so that you're not ending up with too much on everybody's plate at the same time.
Then you also get into a balance with the resources, right? Can the resources handle delivering this project right now, or do you need to push it out just a little bit? You may have some delays with that and with your tech center or consultants. Okay. So budget. Budget is, you may have any number of phases. You may have a planning phase, the PE phase, right-of-way, utility, construction, and or other phases. The other phases may include IGA payments, tree removal, small contracts, railroad, or advanced acquisition. Make sure you identify those, because again, any modification to any of those will require a STIP amendment. You don't want to do that if you don't have to. Make sure you try to identify and mark all of those in advance. It will save you time and a headache in the long run. Opportunities. So this is something that I know my area manager really stressed, as to look for any opportunities to leverage or combine with other projects. So leveraging options would be typically like bike ped improvements, signing improvements, illumination, and there are several small funds that are available for the leveraging options. If you speak with your area manager, they typically know upfront what those pools are. But as you go through the scoping process, don't be afraid to look for those options and speak to your area managers. Hey, these are things that we can add on to this project. As you work with your active transportation liaison within your region. Talk to everybody, get their input, see what is available, see what you can do. Again, going back to that one project that I had mentioned of combining all of those other elements into one big STIP project, that's a great opportunity. We have active transportation in that one as well. This is a new form that I was made aware of after we went through the scoping of this last STIP. This is a leveraging options form. So as you go through this next scoping cycle, I would encourage you to get a hold of this form, fill it out for any of the leveraging options. Again, we have highway leverage funds, safety leverage funds, and active transportation leverage funds.
Risks. Late identification, we've talked about this multiple times, so we'll be quick here. Make sure you're identifying your risks, make sure you're documenting your risks. Railroad's going to blow your project if you don't identify it. I talk about this because I have had it bite me multiple times. There's a lot of opportunity to protect your project from having issues if you're identifying the risks up front in your scoping efforts.
All right, so what outcomes should we expect? We have multiple deliverables that are a result. So we have our project business case that should be finalized and ready to go, should be signed. We have our project scoping estimate. Be as detailed as you can be. You want to have as much information there. Again, if you have to make large adjustments on that, you may require a STIP amendment. Try to save yourself the hassle. Do it right the first time. Do all the prep that you need. Project scoping summary notes. There is a form for that as well. That is a newer form that I was, again, not aware of up front, but this scoping summary notes is a great little form to help you summarize overall the notes from all of the different disciplines as you wrap up your scoping process for each of the projects. Complete a draft project schedule. Include durations and possibly even the years. Coordinate with construction. Don't overload them all in 1 year. See if you can balance those projects out. You may need to adjust your schedules in order to accommodate that. You'll also produce a draft project charter as well. State-wide forms, again, project charter. We have a newer, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. We have the project charter, which is now a statewide form. Utilize that, utilize all of the forms. Go back through if you need access or copies of these forms. We've got links to everything. If you can't find something, just please don't hesitate to reach out to Kelly or I, or Oscar has access to all of that. I believe most everything is all on the project delivery portal as well. So just wrap up a couple quick takeaways. Kelly?
Takeaway that I want you to walk away from this with is you are not a one-man show. You need to count on your teams. They are the ones who are going to help you. They're the experts and they can make you look really good, but you have to work with them and ask them questions, have them help you. The other takeaway is your first project, your first attempt is not going to be perfect, and it's okay.
I would takeaways. I would recommend using the tools that you have. Learn the training and get the forms, utilize those forms. Again, utilize your resources, ask questions. Don't forget, ask questions. And then take ownership. these projects that you are scoping more than likely will come back to you and you will be leading them. So take the ownership up front.
That or somebody's going to be yelling at you later.
Any questions?
I've got one back here. So speaking of first-time projects, I've got my first local bridge project. And it was scoped several years ago, and then it got slipped to the next step. So we're coming up on project initiation, and there's a big question on whether or not the utilities are actually participating or not. And it's a really sizable utility part. So, you know, we're looking at, Tammy Saldivar is going to go look at the project with me again and just double check everything. You know, wanting to make sure we've got everything in line, like you said, with Abraham Lincoln sharpening that axe before we get to chopping the tree. But at what point, when you have a project that you've inherited and you're looking at it with a fresh set of eyes and you're questioning things, at what point is it okay to rescope? Do you do it with a full team? Can you just do it with like one discipline? And do you have to go back to the funding program manager and get permission to rescope? Or can you just say, hey, let's, you know, from the transportation project manager standpoint, can you just say, we need to do this?
I have done that on many projects. I hate inheriting projects, and I hate giving projects. I gave, when I took over 217, I inherited it. I am number 5 for project manager on that project. And I handed about 8 projects over to Josh, and I feel really sorry because there were things that I heard him say that I'm like, I'm sorry, I feel like a jerk. So when you walk into that, you do walk in and look with fresh eyes, and you will see things that the person who had it before you didn't see because they were focused somewhere else, and they caught things that maybe you would have missed. So do understand that all of us have our areas that we do see, and I have more than once gone back and kind of rescoped. When you're in the middle of a project, you've already used a good part of your budget. You can't always do that. You can't always go back and ask for more money when you've identified. So when you first get the project, that's the best time. And most of my projects to this point, I have rescoped when I've been handed the project. Now on the 217 project, we're 2 years into design when I was handed the project, and most of the budget was already used. We had to go ask for more money. And then, like I said, they dumped a whole lot of more elements onto the project. I said, wait, we're gonna take 2 weeks, we're gonna go rescope some stuff because there was no bike ped in the project, but we had triggered the bike bill. We had to meet the standards. So I said, I went to the area manager, I went to our region manager, I said, hey, I have to do this and this is why. And he says, you're right, you have to do this, go do it. So yes, you do ask, but most, at least from my experience, if I go and I tell my managers, I have to do this and this is why, give them the reasons why, they're most likely going to tell you, yes, go ahead and we'll find the money for you to do it.
Okay, we have a question over here, and probably a real short question depending on how long this one is.
I want to thank you for using the word collaboration. You're the first speaker who has used that word, and I really appreciate it. I think it's something we need to focus on more. The second part is when you look at a PMI, one of the major outputs of scoping is WBS. Now, I mentioned this last year before and I got shut down, but I'm going to say it again. I think we need a work breakdown structure that correlates to our scoping so we can track expenditures with respect to structures and disciplines. That's not happening at ODOT yet, but I think it could. And thirdly, I just want to ask you, how can we ensure accountability at the very beginning of scoping, that is the business case, the initial business case? I think that there is a need to consider the quality of those documents in terms of have we answered the why? And I found it very useful. And I just ask you guys, have you found the same need to go and have those conversations with the funding manager and the sponsor to ensure that you know exactly what the scope and the intent of the project actually is so you can hold the team accountable to that very thing?
Absolutely, and that's what I did on the first project that I mentioned about the scoping issues, is that I went back to the funding manager and I said, what's the purpose of this project, and we are not going to meet the purpose of this project within this IAMP, and we need to make some adjustments in order to properly meet the needs of this project. Yes, it was a SPIS site, and they were trying to address specifically the intersection at the SPIS site, but they didn't consider that there were 4 other intersections within a 500-foot area that we could have adjusted somewhere else and better accommodated the needs of that overall IAMP. And had we looked at all of that, yeah, we would have seen that we needed to make an adjustment there.
Okay, I'm going to amend my contract with you. We are out of time, but please utilize your question cards over there. We are headed into a 15-minute break, but I do want to remind you the Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda panel is tomorrow with Kelly and also with Justin and then Chris Bucher. So write down what those are. I'm sending them questions ahead of time so that they're prepared. So please take advantage of it. Have a good break.